Hey guys, this is your exam review video. The best way to study math is to do math. So we're going to do some math questions together. And then of course you have some to do in Connexus as well. So to start off, we're going to talk about solving equations. Remember when we solve equations, we like to draw our line down the equal sign. Oops, I need a pen. We like to draw our line down the equal sign, box off our letters, and figure out how to get the letter by itself. So in this problem, I notice that I have x's on both sides. So it doesn't matter which way I move my x's, but I gotta make sure that I get them on the same side. Anytime you go from one side to the other, you have to do the opposite operation. A lot of people like to move their x's to the left. So I'm gonna show you that first. But it actually would be easier in this problem to move your x's to the right, and I'll tell you why in just a minute. But if I want to get rid of negative 3x, I have to add 3x's to both sides. This cancels. Now, when we say it cancels, we actually mean that negative 3x plus 3x is 0. And then over here, we're going to bring down our minus 30, and then negative 6x plus 3x would be negative 3x. We're still trying to get that letter by itself, so we got to get rid of the minus 30. Since it's negative, I'm going to add it to both sides. I'm going to get negative 3x equals positive 30. And then I've got to get this x by itself. Right now it's negative 3 times x. The opposite of multiplying is dividing. So I'm going to divide each side by negative 3. And x would equal negative 10. Be really careful. When you cancel these things out here, this line will help you stay organized. You can't just go straight to dividing by negative 3 here and end up getting a positive 10. You got to make sure you move that 30 over to the other side. For this one, if we draw our line down the equal sign and box off our letter, this one's a little bit more straightforward. I just want to show you a decimal so that you don't freak out when you see decimals on your exam. But we need to get rid of negative 7.2, so we're going to add 7.2 to both sides. This will cancel. Again, when you cancel it, it's actually turning it into 0, but I don't need to write plus 0 here. So I'm just going to come over here and add this side. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Whoops, carry the 1. So when I add those, I get 22. And then I'm going to divide each side by 5.5. And if this is stressing you out, if you're like, wait, how'd you get that? Where'd that come from? Please don't forget that you are always encouraged to use your Desmos calculator. So you can come over here and type in 14.8 plus 7.2. Oops, I didn't put 0.2. And then you can take that 22 and divide it by 5.5. Turns out in this example, we get a whole number answer, but if you get a decimal answer on your test or whatever, please do not freak out. Decimal answers are okay. All right, let's move on to the next topic. We are now going to solve and graph inequalities. So we solve these the same way. We're still going to want to draw our line down the symbol. We're still going to want to box off our x, and we're going to try to get the x by itself. So I'm going to add 4 to both sides. So I'm going to get x is greater than negative 3. But we need to know how to graph it as well. Remember, if you have a greater than or less than symbol, that's going to be an open circle on the graph. If you have a greater than an equal to or less than an equal to, that's going to be a filled in or a closed circle on the graph. And the other thing we talked about is your arrow needs to point whichever way your symbol points. So if we were going to graph this on a number line, we would go, I'm just going to call this 0, so negative 1, negative 2, negative 3. Since it's a greater than symbol, we would have an open circle, and it would be pointing to the right. So all of that would be shaded in. Those would all be solutions. Anything greater than negative 3 is a solution. Negative 3 is not a solution, and anything less than negative 3 is also not a solution. So let's look at one more of those. Before we even graph this, we can tell that this is going to be a closed circle, and we can tell that it's going to be pointing to the left. So if it's multiple choice, you could probably pick out an answer just based off of looking at the symbol. But since this isn't multiple choice, I am going to go ahead and solve for x. Oops, I should have boxed it. That wasn't very smart. So I'm going to add 5 to each side. I'm going to get x divided by 3 is less than or equal to 18. multiply each side by 3. Don't freak out when you see the fraction. Just remember this says x divided by 3. The opposite of dividing is multiplying. So you would multiply each side by 3. And I don't know what 18 times 3 is. So I'm going to come over here to Desmos and I'm going to type it in. 18 times 3. 54. So x has to be less than or equal to 54. So on the number line, you would have a closed circle at 54, and it would be pointing to the left. I know it's closed because it has that equal to line under it. All right, then we go into Pythagorean theorem. Remember, Pythagorean theorem is a squared plus b squared equals c squared, and it helps you find the missing side of a right triangle. This is a right triangle. Sorry, I should have marked it for you. This is a right triangle, and we want to find this missing side length. So we're going to plug in our values. 5 squared plus 8 squared equals we don't know squared, so I'm going to let it be c. You can type this all in your calculator in one step if you want to, or you can do 5 squared first, and then 8 squared, and then you can add those together. Or I want to show you that you could type it in the calculator at once. So you could also come over here and do, oh well, that got really big. 5 squared plus 8 squared. You could type that in all at one time, or you could add them afterwards. So we get 89 equals c squared. That is not our side length. Our side length is not going to be 89 because we're not done. We still have to get c by itself. Remember, the opposite of squaring is square rooting. And whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other. So we are going to square root both sides because squares and square roots cancel, leaving you with just c. And the square root of 89, that is going to be an irrational number. It is not a perfect square, so it's not going to be a nice, pretty answer. If you tried to type in the square root of 89, you would see that it's a decimal that does not end and it does not repeat. If they asked you to round it, you could say it's about 9.4, or they might just leave the answer as the square root of 89. That is the exact answer. Let's keep going. Next, we're going to talk about graphing lines. We're going to do this both ways. First, we're going to get the equation and graph the line, and then we're going to look at the line and write the equation. So the big thing to remember is that the slope is always the number attached to x, and the y-intercept is the plus or minus number at the end. So on this one, I know my slope is negative 2 over 5, and my y-intercept is negative 3. We start graphing by graphing the y-intercept first. So I'm going to put a point on negative 3. Oops, I got to scroll down. And then from that point, I'm going to go down 2 because it's a negative 2, and over 5 in the positive direction because the 5 is positive. So I'm going to go down 2 spaces and over 5. And then you could draw your line. If this was multiple choice, I like to just make sure it crosses at the y-intercept, and then I like to check to see if the line is positive or negative. If the slope is negative, I know it has to go downhill. So I can use that over here. I already know this line is going downhill. Remember, if you put a ball on the right side of the graph, left side of the graph, you're going to see which way it would roll. So this is a negative slope. So I know that I'm looking for answers that have a negative number attached to x. I also know that it crosses the y-axis at positive 2. That might be enough information on a multiple choice test to get the right answer. But since this isn't multiple choice, I need to find other points that cross the grid, and I need to do my rise over run. So I'm going to rise up 2 spaces and run over 1. So my slope would be 2 over 1. A lot of times they'll rewrite that as just negative 2x plus 2 because you don't have to have the over 1 when you write the equation. All right, then we move on to word problems. A landscaper charges $10 to show up plus $50 per hour of service. Write an equation in slope-intercept form. Remember, that's y equals mx plus b for the cost y after h hours of service. All right, so let's write our equation first. He charges $10 to show up plus $50 per hour. And it's already told us that hours is represented by the letter x. So hopefully that kind of triggers your brain to realize that that's what you have to put with the letter X. It's $50 per hour plus that $10 just to show up. That $10 does not get a letter because it is a constant value. He will always charge $10 just to show up. But the $50 does change based off how many hours he works. If he works 1 hour, it's just $50. But we're going to look at what it would happen if he worked for 6 hours. So if we plug in a 6 here, and we did 50 times 6 plus 10, he would make $310. All right, so solving systems of equations. I don't know if you remember during the semester, but we did not teach you the algebra way of doing this. We always used Desmos. Your answer is wherever your lines cross. So we are going to go straight to Desmos and we are going to type these two equations in. Oops, keep doing that. So I'm going to have 6x plus 3y equals, oops, where's my equals to? I need to move this up a little bit. Okay, whatever. Equals 33. That's one line. And then my other line was 6x minus y equals 5. Wherever they intersect is your solution. So the solution here would be 2, 7. It is truly that easy. You just graph them, see where they cross, and that is your answer. Then we talked about adding and subtracting polynomials. Remember, if you see a minus in the middle, you have to distribute that negative. In other words, you have to change the sign of everything in the back parentheses. So negative 2x squared would become positive 2x squared, positive 2x would become negative 2x, and negative 2 would become positive 2. I don't change anything in the first parentheses, so I'm just going to write it down. And then I am going to combine like terms. Oops, that was a positive. Didn't put my plus sign there. 6x squared plus 2x squared is going to be 8x squared. Negative 3x minus 2x is going to be negative 5x. And positive 4 plus positive 2 will be a positive 6. That is how you would subtract. If there's a plus sign in the middle, you don't need to distribute any signs. You just go straight to combining like terms. Up next, we have rules of exponents. When you divide with the same base, you subtract your exponents. And that's it. We are also going to talk about what to do when you multiply exponents on one of these examples. First, let's get to this. This is actually a distributing problem. We're going to take this negative 5. Remember, the sign that's in front of it is attached to it, and we're going to distribute it to everything in the parentheses. So negative 5 times 2n is a negative 10n, and negative 5 times negative 3 is a positive 15. Then I'm going to drop this 4n straight down, and then I'm going to combine like terms. 4n minus 10n is a negative 6n. You can't add the 15 to it, you just leave it on the end. And then we're also going to talk about distributing here. This is where we're talking about when you multiply with the same base, you add your exponents. So we're going to get 2x squared plus 4x. Remember, you have to distribute all the pieces, not just the first thing. And then you need to combine like terms. I'm having to move super quick here because I have less than a minute. If 8 students represent 20% of the class, how many students were there total in the class? So we have our formula, part over whole equals percent over 100. We plug our values into our formula and then we cross multiply and solve it. So that's how we're going to do that one. We also need to know how to convert to decimals and percents, and you can use Desmos for this. So go to your calculator and type in 3 divided by 5. Oops. So the decimal is 0.6, and then for the percent, you would move that decimal twice. When you move that decimal twice, make sure to put in a 0 anywhere you don't have a value, so that would be 60%. Good luck on your test.